All right, good Shabbos. Chag Sameach. Merry Christmas. Don't you guys believe Yeshua was born in Sukkot? Today's Merry Christmas then. Yeah, when you go home, you got to work on this, right? So I was wondering just last night if I shouldn't put a chimney in my sukkah so that Santa can come in and put presents under my etrog tree. But anyway, that's a tradition we're still working on. All right, so we finally reached Sukkot, the final festival of the three pilgrimage festivals, of course, right? Which was Pesach, Shavuot, and then Sukkot. And we're going to celebrate this festival for entire 8 days long, Sukkot, right? We're going to be sitting in our sukkah. After the trials and travails of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the difficulty and the judgment, now we go and sit in that sukkah and Hashem gives us a big old hug. Isn't that nice? And the commandment is, sit in the sukkah. This is my kind of mitzvah. All you got to do is sit. That's it. And every moment that you sit in the sukkah, your commandments that you've done keep multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. You know, we're ringing it up. It's the bonus round right now. So I love this. And I don't know why my parents decided to call me Sitney. Because I love just sitting. This is the commandment that is made for me. Now, the Talmud actually goes as far as calling this, the commandment of Sukkot, an easy mitzvah. The Talmud says this is an easy mitzvah. Let me ask those of you who did build a sukkah this year. Would you guys agree? Is this an easy mitzvah? Look at Carl. He built his sukkah for the first time this year. Carl did not sleep last night. Andre says he's so stiff this morning from building the sukkah. The Talmud says this is an easy mitzvah. Tell that to your lower back pains after lifting the skach. Tell that to all the splinters that you have in your fingers. Tell that to all the leaves and dust that have fallen in your eyeballs this morning. Your eyes are burning and you don't know why. Apparently, this is an easy mitzvah. Now, what adds to the fact that it makes it quite challenging to get to Sukkot is the fact that we just had Yom Kippur 4 days ago. And how many days do you need to recover from Yom Kippur? About 5. So here we are 4 days later. And I can tell you personally from my life that these last 4 days have been hell. Absolute hell in my life. My entire family has been sick. Even on Yom Kippur I was sick. How I made it to Yom Kippur, only God knows. It's 100% by God's grace. We've been sick. And you know what it's like when you have sick kids in the house? No sleep. So we haven't slept for about 4 days now. Not only do you not sleep, but what is the sound that you hear? The wonderful ambience of the house when you have kids that are sick? Screaming and crying and snotty noses and moaning, and antibiotics make the kids even worse. And then you're walking around in the house with a permanent headache, and you're hearing this for 4 days non-stop after Yom Kippur, and you have to stress about building the sukkah, preparing for the festival, having a double service here at Shul for the weekend. Then you go through to Joburg to buy a lulav, and lo and behold, the whole country has a shortage of lulav and esrog. So you stand in the line for how many hours did I stand there? I think it was 2.5 hours I stood in line. When I started the line, they said, all right, the kosher lulavs are this low price. Halfway through the line, they said, oops, we sold out all the kosher ones. We've only got the medium and the high ones left. By the time I got to the front of the line, they sold out everything except for the most expensive ones. So this year, I've got a lulav and an etrog of royalty. Not by choice, but by bankruptcy. All right, so this has been my week, right? Now, I can't help wonder, every year when we get to Sukkot, when all the stress hits me right after Yom Kippur, why did God only give us 4 days? I'm going to have a word with him one day when I see him. God willing, I will see him. But inevitably, this happens every single year. I end up complaining, never more so than this year, when the family is sick and all these things are happening. So what happens to us as human beings when life becomes uncomfortable? When we start stressing and we get this pain and that pain? Inevitably what happens with us is we end up lashing out at something. And we've all got different ways that we lash out, right? Some of us lash out verbally. Some of us hide away behind alcohol. Some of us lash out physically, right? One thing that men do, and let's be honest, all of the men sitting here today, you've done this before. You take out your frustrations either on the wall or on a door, whatever the closest thing is you can find that's hard that you can punch, right? Or you find something on the floor that you can kick as hard as you can. A tissue box works perfectly. It flies across the room. You really get that anger out of you. Or for you youngsters, you gamers, you take your remote control and bah! Either against the wall or against the screen, and you break the TV screen. This happens over and over again. I've seen many, many online videos of this happening. People destroying their TV screens or their computer screens when this happens. And what is the result when this happens? The result is worse off. You end up breaking a knuckle from punching the door, breaking a toe from kicking the cupboard, breaking your controller. And how much do controllers cost? Over 1,000. These guys are clever. They know how your anger makes money for them. So what happens is eventually you end up worse off than you were in your original discomfort and stress and the feeling you had in the first place. Now let's look at that in relation to Sukkot and where we find ourselves and the building of the Sukkah that happened this week. Because this leaves us with a choice of attitude towards the commandments of God. Is Sukkot an easy mitzvah? Or is Sukkot really just a schlep? I don't know how many of you found it difficult last night to go eat in your sukkah. You have to carry all that food out into the sukkah, right? Not only that, once you put it down in the sukkah, all the bugs from the leaves fall into your food and it's no longer kosher, so you can't eat it. You're sitting there, you're supposed to be inviting the ushpazin, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but instead, who comes to your sukkah? The whole world's mosquitoes and flies. Uninvited, they arrive in your sukkah as well. You sit there and the wind is blowing. Before you know it, the rain's going to fall through your sukkah. It's going to be unbearable heat in your sukkah. You're not going to be sitting comfy. So it becomes very, very easy to complain while sitting in the sukkah. And the Talmud picks up on this on the very same page where it calls the commandment of Sukkot an easy mitzvah. In Tractate Avodah Zarah 3a, it tells us a story. Listen to this story. I've told you guys many years ago, but I would remind you of it to look at a point about it. It says, at the end of the age, the Gentiles will come before Hashem and complain and say, why did you give the Torah only to the Jews? If you gave it to us, we would have kept it perfectly without breaking it. So offer it to us anew, they say to Hashem. And Hashem obliges. He says, all right, humor me. Let's see what happens. Instead of giving you all 613 commandments, I'll give you one commandment to keep. In fact, I'll give you a very easy mitzvah. I'll give you the mitzvah of Sukkot. So what happens in this midrash? All the Gentiles in the world go onto their roofs and they build sukkahs for themselves because this is their one commandment. But, as the parable goes, it's the month of Tammuz. Why is it the month of Tammuz? Maybe because these guys always make their own calendars. Who knows? I don't know. But Hashem tells them to do it in the month of Tammuz, which is the month of summer in Israel, the warmest, hottest, driest month in Israel. So what happens is while they're sitting in their sukkahs in this parable, God sends a blistering heat. In fact, the Talmud calls it a piercing heat. It goes right through the shade of the sukkah and burns them right here on their blessed spots. And what happens? They can't take the heat, says the Talmud. They get up, kick the sukkah, like we said earlier when we take out our anger, right? They kick the sukkah and they leave. In young day terms, we call this rage quit. Right? They rage quit the sukkah. So this is the story. Now, I'm bringing up the story because there's a point in it, not because I want to make a theme of anti-Gentile things in the Talmud this week, which happens to be a theme. But we're not going to talk about that this week. Today, I want to look specifically at a lesson we can learn from this. Because even if a Jew was sitting in that sukkah and God would send this blistering heat, wouldn't they also leave the sukkah? Yes, of course. Anyone would leave the sukkah in this blistering heat. In fact, the Talmud goes on to quote Rava, who says, the mitzvah is, if you are uncomfortable in your sukkah, you're allowed to leave the sukkah. Did you know that? Because the commandment is, you shall dwell in your sukkot for 7 days, just like you dwell in your house. You guys live in a house that's uncomfortable? No. So the sukkah is meant to be like your house. So it has to be comfortable for you. If you find yourself uncomfortable in the sukkah, you're exempt from sitting in the sukkah. You're allowed to get up and to leave that sukkah. So that's not the issue. The fact that these Gentiles in the story left the sukkah is not the issue. The problem is here, the attitude they had. Because they got up and they kicked the sukkah before leaving. Which means they scoffed at God's commandments. Do you know anyone like this who scoffs at God's commandments? Who knows? Maybe they said, I don't need all this legalism, this law of the sukkah. I've got grace. Bah! Kick the sukkah. Let's get out of here. Sounds familiar, right? Because of their attitude towards God's commandments, they weren't even able to keep the easiest of the commandments, which is the commandment of the sukkah. So let's bring that home to ourselves. How does that apply to us? You sitting here, and after what we've done and complained about while we were building our sukkahs, we're going to sit in a sukkah for the next 7 days, which means we're going to be bared to the elements around us and might become uncomfortable, right? The wind, the mosquitoes, the heat, the sound of gunfire and police sirens outside our houses. We're going to be set bare to this. This is one of the lessons of the sukkah, right? You're supposed to go out of this comfortable zone, and you've got to realize that at any moment your life can just disappear. Everything relies upon the mercy of Hashem to exist. That's one of the lessons. The frailty of your life is a lesson for Sukkot. And life is difficult. It's going to have challenges. But no, nobody said life would be easy. But even if life were easy, if Hashem gave you only one commandment to keep, and it was an easy commandment, it would be the commandment of Sukkah. The lesson here is how we treat God's commandments, the attitude that we have towards God's commandments. Having a bad attitude could spoil everything. So that's a valuable lesson I want to share with you guys for this year. As we're about to sit in that Sukkot for 7 days, make sure we choose to have a good attitude towards God's commandments, despite the circumstances you find yourself in. Right? Whether you're suffering with the sukkah, whether you couldn't build it finished, whether you couldn't get a lulav or an etrog, whether your entire family is sick and you're struggling and everyone's screaming and you've got a headache and you haven't slept for 4 days, be careful not to complain about the commandments of Hashem. Because when life gives you lemons, or in our case, etrogs, you're supposed to make lemonade. Or make a sermon out of it that you can share with the shul. Right? And even though sour lemons and etrogs are sour, we take that sour thing and we use it in order to worship Hashem. That's the message of Sukkot. Chag Sameach! All right, let's continue praying so we can go to sleep.